And this one is a cooperative tiny epic game, and it is also my own personal pick of the week. And I do want to say one thing about this being my pick, because I don't normally pick tiny epic games for my pick of the week, and I just want to mention that it's not because there's so few games this week that I'm making this one my pick. I think this game looks fantastic, and it would have had a really solid chance of being my pick of the week no matter which week it launched. And I will explain why I like this one so much in just a second here, but first I'll just give you an idea of how the game plays, because in this game players are going to be working together as asymmetrical investigators, each with their own special abilities, but players are going to be working together to try and send a great old one back to the realm that it came from. And if you're not familiar with H.P. Lovecraft or the Cthulhu mythos, a great old one is essentially a monster that is so beyond our comprehension that just looking at them drives us insane, and they usually come from outer space or have just been hanging out deep underneath the ocean for thousands of years until they just decide to wake up and cause havoc on the world. They aren't all necessarily trying to cause havoc. We might just be in their way, or they might just look at us as ants and not really of any significance to whatever they're deciding to do at the time. But there's also going to be a bunch of these great old ones offered in this game, and they're all going to be coming with their own asymmetrical abilities and special effects, and you only ever use one in a single game, which means that you're going to have quite a lot of variety from game to game. Not only that, but players are going to be playing on this main board here that's made up of a bunch of different locations, and each of these locations are randomly placed, and they are double-sided, and there's even more of these tiles offered in the game, and they each do have different special abilities for any of the players that are currently standing on them. And the way that players actually win this game is by moving around to those various locations in order to translate the Necronomicon page that is located at that location. Once players have done this enough, that's going to be making the Great Old One vulnerable, and you're going to be flipping that Great Old One's card to the other side. That side of the card is going to reveal a bunch of different portals that players are going to have to work together to try and close up in order to banish that Great Old One from the world. If the players are able to do that, then they win the game, but of course the Great Old One and its followers are not going to make that so easy, and the Great Old One's going to be getting more and more powerful as the game goes on, and if the Great Old One ever maxes out its track, either before or after it's been flipped to the other side, all players will lose the game. In order for players to stand a chance against the Great Old One, players are going to be taking turns performing 3 actions on their turn, but at the start of your turn, you're always going to be rotating the spinner located at the middle of the board. And this is one of the things that I really like about this game, because this is a game that makes full usage of each of its components, because just the one spin of this wheel actually sets multiple things in motion, because whatever location that arrow is pointing at, you're going to be drawing tentacles from a bag, and these tentacles can come in 3 different colors, blue, red, and green. And you might have noticed that each of these locations have 3 different tracks on them matching those colors. Whenever you draw those tentacles, you're going to be adding them to the appropriate track, but if those tracks ever fill up and you need to add another tentacle there, then that's going to be triggering some bad things to happen. But like I said, spinning that wheel has multiple effects, and you don't only care about the location it's pointing at, but you also care about the icon it's pointing at on the actual spinner wheel, because this will have some additional effects which are usually bad, causing you to add more cubes onto the board or do other things that generally aren't great for the players. But that's not all, because you might have also noticed these different colored icons at the top of each location, and these represent the followers of the Great Old One, and whichever one of those is being pointed at by the back of the pointer is actually going to be spawned on the location that the back of that pointer is pointing at. Anytime that a player ends their turn in a location that currently has those minions, that player is going to be going a little bit more insane. And these 3 different colors of tentacles actually represent madness, but in 3 different ways. There's your fear, your rage, and your greed. And what's cool about these is they actually double as resources, and players will be spending these in order to accomplish the different tasks they need to in order to win the game. Just like on the locations, each of these tracks are going to have a limit to the amount of tokens that they can hold, and if you ever need to add a token to a track that's already full, that's going to be triggering your madness to occur, which is going to completely drain that column of any of the tokens on it, which is not a good thing, because like I said, you can spend those to accomplish different tasks within the game. So ideally you do want to be using your actions to spend these before you go insane. But also, if this happens too many times, then your character goes permanently insane and you do lose the game. But the very last thing that happens after you've spun the wheel is that you're also going to be moving the Great Old Ones token to the location that the back of the wheel is pointing at. At the start of the game, before the Great Old Ones card has been flipped to its more powerful side, the Great Old One just essentially acts as a blocker, preventing any of the players from being able to go within the location where the Great Old One is currently located. If there is someone already located at that location, then they just have to move out of it by the end of their turn. And the different actions that players could perform on their turn are to move to an adjacent location or pick up different tokens at the location that they're located, moving them from the location board onto their own player card. Or finally, they can use an action to banish minions from the location that they're located at. And like I said before, each of those actions will be more powerful if you have more of the associated token on your player card. But there are some other actions you can perform as well, like the location-specific ability, or you can use an action in order to spend resources from your player card in order to complete the Necronomicon card located at the location that you're currently standing at. Once players have deciphered enough of those cards, it's going to be flipping the Great Old Ones card to the other side, where players will then start to be able to close up those portals in order to win the game. Once you've gotten to that point, you have made the Great Old One vulnerable, and that's going to allow you to move into the same location as that Great Old One, and this is also going to grant you another action that you can perform on your turn. And this action allows you to roll dice in order to try and close one of those portals, because each of these portals are going to be associated with a different value and a different color, and depending on the Necronomicon pages that you completed, certain colors are going to be easier for your characters. So you're going to have to work with your teammates to decide who's going to be trying to close which portals. But essentially, you're going to be using an action and then rolling dice in order to try and get the value that you need in order to close that portal. And if all the portals are closed before the Great Old One levels up or before one of the players goes completely insane, then they have successfully beat the game. But this is a game that gets harder and harder as the game goes on, and there's a few things to know about how the Great Old One levels up, because wherever their token is on their track, that's going to be dictating how many cubes you draw from the bag each and every turn. And then also some of the cubes in that bag can be black cubes, and once you've pulled out 3 of those black cubes, that's going to be moving the Great Old One one step further down that track. Not only this, but the further they move down the track, the more of their abilities they gain access to, making them even more difficult. There's a few different ways that cubes can be added and removed from that bag, but you absolutely do not want to get more black cubes added into the bag, because that's just going to be increasing the chance of the Great Old One leveling up. And this is why it's so important to make sure that these locations are not filling up with too many of these tentacles or too many of those minions, because if that happens, that's going to be causing another black cube to be added to that bag. And I just think it's so cool how generally these tentacles are a bad thing and can cause terrible things to happen out on these different locations, but then players are also intentionally adding them onto their own player card in order to level up their actions, and then to also spend them to complete the different Necronomicon cards out on the board. This is just another example of this game fully utilizing its components, with these tentacles coming into play in so many different ways, both good and bad, that the players are going to have to weigh the pros and cons of every time they decide to do any of their actions in this game. And I think this is going to make for a really fun game, and it's the reason that this is my pick of the week. I'm really excited to check this one out and see what other Great Old Ones and Elder Gods make it into the mix. And if you're interested in this one as well, you can check it out. I'll have it linked in the description below.